Welcome, Nina. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you on. And I really just want to dive right in because you have so much insight and experience in the work that you've done in the past that I don't want to waste another minute of just, doing a very long intro. So let's dive right in and tell individuals a little bit about your story, your journey, and how you went from, where you were working in corporate to now running an extremely successful business, helping executives and people be successful in their careers.
Great. Well, thank you for having me on, and I'm excited to share my story. I'd like to say that I had a grand plan that led me to where I am, but it's actually had some unexpected twists and turns along the way.
Mhm.
I spent 14 years at Deloitte Consulting, and it was interesting because I originally thought I was going to be a doctor. So, my family is a family of traditional Indian parents, and so the whole doctor, lawyer, those professions that you can put your arms around and think about, that was the path that I was headed down. And instead ended up getting into healthcare through the business side. So coming out of the MBA program at the University of Texas, I ended up going to work for Deloitte. And I still have a lot of passion around healthcare. But I came into consulting thinking, oh, I'll be in here for, 2 or 3 years, learn a lot, and then get out and do something different.
Mhm.
But instead, it really has led me down a very different path than I expected to go down. So I was with Deloitte for 3.5 years and started out doing business strategy consulting, and then frankly got fried with the travel and decided, you know what, I don't know that I'm enjoying this enough to want to stick with it. So I left and ended up moving from Houston back to Austin and
Mhm.
worked for a boutique consulting firm, thinking if I took some of the travel out, that would fix things. And then realized, there were other things that I really enjoyed about my consulting work. And then I got a call from Deloitte asking me to come back. And I thought, no, I'm not going back. I'm not going to go have a conversation. It took them a while to get me to come back in and have a conversation about the opportunity, which was to help start a middle market consulting practice.
Mm.
And, to make a long story short, I ended up going back, and it was a really meaningful experience. So it was a practice that was more regionally focused. So it didn't involve as much travel. Got to work with some people I enjoyed working with. And, my career at Deloitte, I ultimately ended up being for 14 years. But I had a very unique experience in that I was in different consulting groups, worked with a lot of different people. So I did business strategy work, I did operations consulting, and then ultimately went into leadership development.
Mhm.
And when I was up for partner in consulting,
Mhm.
I decided that that wasn't what I wanted.
Mhm.
And I remember at that time having some pretty challenging conversations with some of the other partners who felt like they'd really invested a lot in me. And they were really surprised that it wasn't what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
So I still wanted to stay with the firm and decided to leverage some of the experience I had in the leadership development space, working with external clients and
Right.
bringing that internally into our company. So I became a member of the US HR Executive Committee and learned a lot about what it takes to implement in your own company,
Yes.
because being an external consultant versus dealing with all the politics and all of the challenges that come up internally is very, very different. And so I did that for about 4 years and then started my own company in 2008. So it's hard to believe that it's been 13 years, knowing that I was at Deloitte for 14 years. So 13 years since I've had my own company, but
Uh-huh.
I launched it 3 months before the economy tanked in
Mm.
2008.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah, perfect timing.
Perfect
But
timing. But those are the times where, there's just this renewed sense of urgency for something new or something to help, you know, carry you out of that period. So it might have actually been pretty good timing. Similar to COVID, I think the same thing happened with Beyond Barriers of, timing kind of just helped also, codify what, the what we were offering as well. So you mentioned several things that I think you've had such a rich career. But one of the things that I was really impressed about of you being able to gain some clarity or identify like clarity on your strengths and really, knowing what it is that you wanted to pursue in terms of that career path of one being very young. And like you, I grew up from in a very traditional Mexican American family, and success was defined of becoming a doctor, a lawyer, and maybe a petroleum engineer, because I lived in West Texas, lots of oil. But then you get to college and you realize that there's so many other opportunities, and you realize, rather than staying in that with that narrow frame of reference, doing something different or pursuing something different. What helped you gain some of that clarity, or what made you kind of just decide that's not what I want to do? I want to pursue something different.
Mhm. Well, that's a great question. And I would say, one of the things that's really important to pay attention to is what you don't like as much as what you do like. And what I mean by that, and I'll make this real with a couple of examples here. So even when I was doing some of my pre-med work in college, I hated chemistry. And I was like, oh my gosh, that got me going down this path of thinking about what is this really going to be like for me? And my brother's 8 years older than I am, and he is a doctor. So he was in med school at the time. So I had a chance to really see, some of the things that he was experiencing, but paying attention to the things that resonated for me and the things that didn't. And it got me to this place of saying, is this worth it to me? Like after I go through all these years and years of training, education, loans, and saying at the end of it, is that really what I want to do? Do I love it enough to be able to do all that? Because that's a good litmus test, I think. And then the other piece is, as I reflect back on my career at Deloitte, I am someone who really enjoys learning. So diving into something new. So I think that was well suited to a consulting environment. So you get to work with different clients, different industries as well. And what I've noticed about myself is when I'm not learning and growing, I get disengaged. It's just like, oh, things start to feel like a bit of a drain and a grind. So I think paying attention to your energy. So how much do you really feel like you're flowing with things versus like forcing yourself to get things done? And I spent quite a bit of time delving into areas outside of my primary area of responsibility. So call it extracurricular activities or whatever you want to call it. But it helped me connect to so many different people across the company that were outside of my day-to-day project work and client work.
Yes.
And that afforded me the opportunity to learn about some different things and to develop my reputation. And so some of it was as people got to know me and work alongside me on other things like recruiting or, doing interviews on campus, whatever it might be. Even our women's initiative, right? I got involved in that in 1993 when it first began. So, you really get to know other people and they get to know your skills, and eventually people start pointing some of that stuff out to you. And some of it, is about how much are you willing to listen and really pay attention? Because I think that's where your cultural upbringing can really be a factor as well. So especially, thinking about, being Indian, humility being an important thing, and especially as a female too. So, it took me a while before I came around and started noticing more of those strengths. So when you start seeing people tap into them more and pulling you into things, and you start paying attention to that, as well as the energy you have around using those strengths, it makes a big difference in terms of how intentional you become.
I think it's so important that you mentioned in terms of paying attention or listening to what people are telling you your strengths are, because I think there's a misconception that we have personally sometimes that things that come easy to us or something that's a strength that we're not seeing, it doesn't take a lot of effort, we discredit that and we think that it's not worth really very much because it's something that's easy for you to do, and unless you put a lot of effort into something, then it's not worth it. And usually that's your superpower, and it should be effortless. And I think it's so important that you mentioned of just tapping into that, or understanding what are people coming to me for, and how can I, be of service to others using that strength. I think that is
Mhm.
so important.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you said a little bit more about that because, a lot of times we do minimize those things. And in the executive coaching and leadership development work I do, a lot of what I help people do is notice some of those strengths and do a bit of reverse engineering.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you consistently do? Or how you're, so whether you're really good at solving particular types of problems or dealing with certain types of situations, how are you actually approaching it? You
Mm-hmm.
may not even know because you're so good at it and it's second nature. So
Mm-hmm.
being able to break it down into some steps means now you can go teach it to somebody else and you can amplify those strengths.
Yes.
And that's one way, especially that I can get women engaged and looking at their strengths, because there's all this humility and like, oh, well, I don't really want to think about that or talk about that as much. It's like, but you know what? If you could help teach some other people
Mhm.
how to do these things, that is so powerful. Right? Because how
Yes.
many people do you really see around you doing this in this way or as easily? Just because it's easy doesn't mean it easy for you doesn't mean it's easy for everybody else.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to you address something around, even in your career. Once you were this seasoned professional, you were doing very well. I mean, you were on the partner track at Deloitte, which is not an easy thing. It's a huge accomplishment, but you decided at that point that it wasn't the right path for you, and having difficult conversations with individuals about what it is that you wanted. Can you share some techniques? I mean, because that was a difficult decision, right? And it was a risk as well to make that transition. Um, what was the method, or how did you break that down and saying, okay, how do I make this decision? How do I, weigh, do I do this or do I do that? How do you mitigate the risk?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question because I think there's so many things you can get caught up in, like especially the world of shoulds.
Right.
Oh, should I do this? Should I? The big should that's sitting on your shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I think it starts with being honest with yourself. Like, what do you really want? Everyone's going to have an opinion and they're going to have their fears and their concerns that they put squarely on your shoulders. And so, one thing I didn't mention previously, when I left Deloitte after 3.5 years, I didn't have another job lined up.
Mm.
I was just like,
Wow.
I'm just done. Like I'm just done and I'm gonna go. And I'll never forget the reactions I got from people about that at that time. There was a really important lessons that I learned then, which I'll share here in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like, first you get the question, well, where are you going? Well, I'm not going anywhere. I haven't even looked for a job yet. Like,
Yeah.
what? You haven't looked for a job? And so there were two pieces to that. One was, as I was talking to leaders at Deloitte, them going, wait, you'd rather not work anywhere than work here?
Mm-hmm.
That's the implied message. I mean, no one
Right.
actually said that to me, but I thought about that later. I was like, wow, well, that wasn't my intent. It's just, I just need a break. But you hear a lot of people's fears. They're like, wow, you're really brave. I don't think I could do that. You know, what are you going to do? How are you going to approach this? So, and I remember it really stressed me out a lot. And so what I did was I ended up taking a trip to Costa Rica. I'm like, I'm getting away from everybody and I'm going to go do the things that I really enjoy. I went hiking and,
Mm-hmm.
spent time in the rainforest, and it was exactly what I needed
Mm-hmm.
to get my head back on straight, saying, look, I'm not the one who's scared right here and right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I just need to make sure I'm hearing my own voice and connecting back to what matters to me and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that's clear. And so fast forward to the other career changes,
Mm-hmm.
including kind of, declining the partnership and starting my own business.
Mm-hmm.
I actually created that space for me to get grounded again and make sure my decision making wasn't emotional
Mm-hmm.
and that I could have a conversation from a place of authenticity. So that appreciation for everything that the partners had done to invest in
Right.
me and give me opportunities, but also recognizing, you know what? I've given a lot back too. Right?
Hmm.
This wasn't a one-way street. So being
Right.
able to have a balanced perspective and view around what that looks like, that I think that part's really important. And also having a conversation around wanting the best, right? They don't want a partner who's not going to be committed. And I don't want to be somewhere where I'm not feeling like it's really connecting to what I'm passionate about.
Hmm.
So you're reframing things and linking it back to what we each want, but also doing it in a way where you're focusing on the relationship. You're not burning bridges.
Hmm.
I remember there was a partner who was actually very upset with me. Like he didn't talk to me for quite a while.
Oh, wow.
And
Uh-huh.
it's that relationship has been mended, but he took it very personally. I'm like, this didn't have anything to do with you.
Hmm.
This is more about what I really want for myself.
Hmm.
So those are a few things that came into play for me.
That's fantastic. Now, you talked a little bit about the fears of, and you mentioned that, have you taking that bold step and then you realizing that uncovering some of the fears of, wow, you're so brave. I don't think I could do that. How have you managed in your career and as a seasoned executive coach? How do you help people manage or overcome fears and limiting beliefs that really rob them of opportunity?
Hmm. Well, one of the first things that I will tell you, and it connects back to some of what I've been talking about, is remember what a certain decision or opportunity is really about for you, meaning connect it to your
Mm,
passion and your purpose. It is amazing if you can tap into that, how much it helps you overcome fear.
mm,
So, I mean, so starting my business was more about stepping out and saying, look, I want to design the kind of life that I want to design and work with the kind of clients I want to work with.
mm-hmm,
I do some of that at Deloitte, but there's more that I want for myself.
mm-hmm,
And so envisioning what that is that you want, and that passion will fuel you, especially on those days where you're like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? Right. So as the economy is starting to tank and I'm 3 months in
uh-huh,
and questioning whether I made the right decision.
mm-hmm,
Oh yeah, this is what it's about. So that's a huge piece.
mm-hmm,
The other thing that I'll mention that's a really effective strategy is to play out your worst fear. Like just
mm-hmm,
play it out as if you're watching a movie,
uh-huh,
and okay, here's all that stuff that I'm afraid of. And you start to play it out and notice, like, what are some of these big things that are part of that?
mm-hmm,
And then to ask yourself the question, how likely is it that that's going to happen?
mm-hmm,
Right? What are some of the steps I would take if some of this started to happen? And you realize your worst case scenario is not going to occur
right,
because you're smarter than that. You're going to jump in sooner. Right?
mm-hmm,
There's certain things you're going to do. So those are probably two of the biggest strategies that I think could be really helpful. And
mm,
also certainly arming your friends, friends, family members, people that are close to you who you lean on for support.
mm-hmm,
You got to give them that information about why you're doing this. So when you're sitting there with your hands up in the air saying, why am I doing this? Why am I putting
right,
myself through this?
uh-huh,
That they come back and say, remember, this is what you've said to me. This is
mm-hmm.
what it's about. And so that helps you get grounded again.
That's fantastic. Now, you've alluded and you've mentioned that, individuals, key stakeholders, people that you had conversations with who had invested a lot in you and probably likely sponsored you and whatnot throughout the course of your career. How did you gain access? Like one of the things I hear a lot from the young women who come through our program, who we're coaching, who are always looking for mentors and sponsors, are always saying, I don't see enough women out there who can sponsor me. But I heard you saying a lot of male individuals were ones who kind of mentored and sponsored you. Talk a little bit about that. How did you gain access or how did you develop relationships with people who really maybe didn't look like you or even think like you? And how was it beneficial? How was it not maybe? What's the advice you would give?
Well, some of it comes back to really looking at how you can help people understand who you are, right? So connecting in a very authentic way. So taking the time to really invest in getting to know them, asking them questions, learning about that versus like, what do I need from you?
Mm-hmm.
But actually cultivating a genuine relationship. And as I mentioned earlier, some of these other things that I got involved in
Mm-hmm.
gave me an opportunity to work with some leaders and people that I wouldn't typically work with. So that was driven by interests that I had, things that I was passionate about, but also raising my hand and just saying, hey, how can I help?
Mm-hmm.
How can I help with this? This is something that sounds like it's interesting to get involved in. And I'm giving that example in the context of a Deloitte, but I'll just share how it plays out for me today too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a small business owner, and so it's not like I'm in this
Right.
company of thousands of people now.
Mm-hmm.
And I do a lot in the community. I serve on several nonprofit boards,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm constantly sharing information, sharing resources, sharing things that I think will be valuable to people, but also thinking about my strengths and saying, how can I use those strengths to help in this
Mm-hmm.
particular situation? And so, as it relates to the nonprofit world and the community involvement that I have,
Mm-hmm.
serving on boards, I've met a ton of leaders
Right.
and people who share similar passions to me. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not like I'm out there just trying to network. It truly is, hey, we're working side by side on
Mm-hmm.
something we both care about. So it's not a strategy that I would recommend doing if you're not interested or very passionate about what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's pick something else. Like the passion's got to come through. Otherwise, you're not going to show up in the right way.
Right.
So I think that's been super helpful to me.
Fantastic. Now you've coached lots of individuals in their career progression, and one of the things that I hear a lot about is effective execution. Can you share some tips on you yourself, like when you think about and you set a goal, how do you actually execute on it, or how do you help coach someone um, to execution? Because I think it's great. Everybody sets these goals, but as we know, like come New Year's, everybody has these New Year's resolutions and goals and whatnot. And come February, 95% of the people have like not executed on them. What is your advice? How do you coach people through execution?
Yeah, well, one of the phrases that I tend to use a lot is small steps lead to
Mm-hmm.
big results.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes we have like these giant goals,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just get crushed by the weight of your goal. Like it feels overwhelming. How do I get started? As you're talking about New Year's resolutions, I don't typically set those. What
Mm-hmm.
I do is have a theme for the year. Like what's this year going to be about for me? And so I do think that identifying where you would start with something,
Mm-hmm.
and then once you're done with that step, what's the next step that you're going to take? And in fact, you're reminding me, this is how I launched my business.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this may not be a surprise at this point that I'm going to say this, but I didn't have a business plan put together when I left Deloitte. I left, and I thought through, like, what is it that I want to do next? What is it that I want to do next? I just know this isn't
Mm-hmm.
where I want to be right now. And what shape might that take?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the cool things about doing this one step at a time
Mm-hmm.
is that you learn from it. So I didn't have that whole plan. And mind you, I've done strategic plans and business plans for companies, right? Didn't
Right.
have that for myself. But what I did was I identified a few things I did want to focus on and said, okay, well, what's the first thing that I would do? And then what's the next thing? And allowing myself to experience what it was like to live in that,
Mm.
in those choices
Right.
day to day, and being able to course correct as I went forward. And, I don't think I didn't even know that I wanted to start a business initially. Like if you had asked me, earlier on in my career, do you think you'd have your own company? It'd be like, no, that wasn't even a goal. Remember, I was going to be a doctor. So we really taken quite a path here.
Uh-huh.
But, just being able to move forward in a way where you're not overwhelming yourself, you're allowing yourself to learn
Mm-hmm.
and distill what's working, what's not working, what are the modifications that I would make.
Right.
That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Now, one question I do have for you, because you mentioned like when you left, because there are a lot of individuals who, one either switching companies, switching jobs completely, completely switching industries. And for you, it was like going from corporate to entrepreneurship, but you didn't know that at the time.
mhm.
How did you like, one, the fear and limiting belief of the uncertainty of not knowing, like what helped you make that decision to just say, I'm not, like, I don't want to go down this path anymore. I don't want to be in corporate. I'm going to leave this role. How did you do that with with confidence, not knowing what was next? Like, because I think that's what holds a lot of people back, and they end up staying in the role or in the organization that they, really don't want to be there, but because they don't have the certainty on what's on the other end, they just stay. What helped
Mhm.
you just make that decision and say, I'll figure it out later?
Yeah, well, part of it is, remember, this was round 4 for me in terms of like stepping into something
Uh-huh.
different. So part of it truly, I think, is practice, right? Getting comfortable. Like, what's the recipe? So even as I was talking about the trip to Costa Rica, right? Then there was another trip to Brazil for 3 weeks, and then
Right.
there were different things that were in there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
looking at how do I maintain my energy and my perspective so I don't
Mm-hmm.
lose sight of that. But also, I remember distinctly when I decided to leave Deloitte, it was a big deal, right? I mean, I was an executive, I was making really good money, I had a good job. It was weird though, but energetically, I wasn't feeling it.
Right.
I just felt tired. I felt tired. And I'm like, wow, where do I go from here? Like, what do I aspire to? And mind you, because I had worked in several different consulting groups and I had a network that was pretty broad, even outside of consulting,
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of different roles that I could have taken.
Right.
And one of the telltale signs for me was that I couldn't pick up the phone to call anybody at
Mm-hmm.
all to say, hey, I want to leave the role that I'm in and I want to do something different. Let's talk about, what we might be able to do together.
Right.
I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And that was a huge sign for me. And so I think sometimes we get these decisions jumbled up, meaning
Mm-hmm.
the decision to leave is a different decision than the decision to go into a certain job,
Right.
right? They're related, but they're different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was clear, like, I need to step out of this job.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the, okay, how do I make sure that I've got the right energy perspective so that I'm not making an emotional decision?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's the other piece that's probably important to mention is I took a leave of absence for 30 days
Mm-hmm.
before I made the decision to leave
Mm.
because I was worried about making an emotional decision.
Right.
That's what all those fun vacations were about before.
Right.
And at this stage, I had a son who
Mm-hmm.
was super young, right? He was like 2 years old, and so I couldn't just take off to Brazil or go somewhere else. Right? I had to have a different approach, but it's still getting that perspective was really really important,
Mm-hmm.
and then being able to evaluate things a bit more objectively,
Mm-hmm.
saying how important is this to me, and am I moving towards something I want, or am I leaving something behind, right? Am I moving away from something or moving towards something? There's
Right.
a big difference,
Yes.
big,
Yes.
big difference. And I wanted to make sure I was moving towards something.
Mm. That's so important. And I think it's so important that you mention having that EQ, that emotional EQ, or being tuned into that. Can you talk a little bit more about how you disassociate or maybe even take out the emotion and make a much more rational decision? Because I think that's, something that I'm going to grossly generalize, but women do deal with a lot of the kind of emotional decision making sometimes that will hold them back. Um, how do you help someone identify, okay, this decision is rooted in this emotion, or how do I separate that so I make sure that I'm making a very rational, logical decision?
Yeah, it's interesting because we are very emotional beings, period,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Just humans in general.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's always going to be some level of that emotion that comes into the mix. And really, I think the biggest factor to deal with is bringing your stress level down,
Mm.
because we all have stress behavior. And so if you're making a decision from that place, then it's harder. So
Right.
whatever it is that helps you get your stress level down, that's step one. And it's interesting. I do a lot of coaching around that today. So it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter what kind of decision you're talking about, a career one or some other business decision or how you're working with your team. If you're in this really strung out, high stress place, you can't hear what other people are saying and the way that they're saying it's just everything gets kind of skewed. So we know what our stress behaviors look like. So
Right.
that's number one, is bring that stress level down. So however you need to do that. And the other piece that I think is helpful is thinking about who some of your trusted advisors are,
Mm.
right? People that you know will give it to you straight. Just give it to you straight. Like, don't sugarcoat stuff. Just tell me what you really think, because I need to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to engage in conversations with those individuals, and especially making sure you've got people who are in that inner circle
Mm-hmm.
who will push back, right, and challenge you
Right.
and bring some other perspectives to the table. It's not just, everyone who thinks like you and let's all make this decision together, or influence this decision.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those things are really, really critical, and to be deliberate about doing those. And the last point I'll make around this is trusting your gut.
Mm.
So
Yes.
part of that, getting the stress out of the way, is for you to tune into your gut. So I've done some additional coaching over the past couple of years, which is called somatic coaching,
Mm.
where you
Yes.
tune into your body, right? What is your
Mm-hmm.
body telling you?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's amazing, in the United States, I think there's such an emphasis on ignoring all the stuff. Ignore your
Yes.
pain, your thirst, your hunger, your what, it's like you're working away and you're focused, laser focused. But if you stopped and tuned in to your body, right? You have aches and pain. Like, what are you feeling? Like your shoulders all super tight. Like what's happening? Are you in knots?
Uh-huh.
What's happening? Like there's some chronic things that can start appearing.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to tune into your body a bit more and understand, what is my body telling me?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
that part can be powerful too.
Absolutely. Just kind of because if not, you find yourself burning the candle at both ends, and then get to a point where your body will just shut down and make that decision for you. So it's a little bit of that preventative of checking in. But I do agree with you that we tend to minimize the whole wellness piece of it and just try to push through. But at some point, that is just going to implode. And is one of the most dangerous things that you can really, do for yourself. Um, I wanted to check in with you and talk a little bit about, just the various different work that you've done. And we're very focused also on helping, women accelerate into leadership and really looking at, how do you, what are some of those nuanced things or challenges that you see holding women back? And you've coached lots of women and individuals and lots of males as well. But what would you say is some of the biggest challenges or themes that you see appear that you've helped women kind of get away from or coach through?
Well, I think one of the key things is helping women see themselves. And what I mean by that, it is kind of coming back full circle to
Uh-huh.
those key strengths that we
Right.
were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
Women have a tendency to really underestimate themselves.
Yes.
And so, and there's a tight linkage between that and confidence and really stepping into what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the coolest things I think about the work that I get to do,
Mm-hmm.
is when you can help a woman see herself and
Mm-hmm.
see how she really brings value and step into it and own it. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. So exciting. And
Yes.
so I feel like that's a huge piece
Mm-hmm.
of what we're focusing on. And then it just pops up in so many different ways, because when you can help a leader notice their strengths, and then, as I was talking about earlier, the whole reverse engineering and looking back, well, what is it that I do, and now I can teach that to others. And
Mm-hmm.
then so there's this ripple effect
Mm-hmm.
that you start to be able to create. And and some of these things that I'll call differences, right?
Right.
Differences that, so we're not the same as everyone else, and just looking at our different backgrounds, a lot of times, we tend to mask those things and hide those things.
Mm-hmm.
And but what if, that's the thing that is your superpower. So, it's interesting. Even for myself, I can say that the earlier part of my career was so much more focused on blending in and fitting in. And if you connect it back to my background,
Mm-hmm.
being a first generation immigrant to the United States, there being a history of racial discrimination that my family had experienced. And so the whole
Right.
blending in was important, right? Because there
Right.
was there's a lot that's happened, and there's a lot that my parents experienced even before I was born.
Right.
And so, you know, over time, that is something that I've looked at and said, well, those experiences that I've had that are unique, how do those help me step out in ways that maybe other people can't?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the immigrant experience is one of some risk taking, some get it done, roll up
Right.
your sleeves. I don't want to stereotype around it, but there are certain
Yeah.
elements, right, around grit
Mm-hmm.
and moving forward. And that was role modeled for me. So I think over time, I've realized, wow, I need to own those things a
Mm-hmm.
bit more. And so, coming back to your question about women, it's helping them notice some of those life experiences, those things that truly help them bring a unique perspective and approach, and how powerful that can be.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And help me, let's go a step further, because once you help a woman see herself and really codify her unique value proposition, how do you help that individual get over the hump of the art of self promotion, of like making
Mm.
sure that others know what that unique value proposition is? Because I sometimes see that as the next roadblock of like, well, I don't want to toot my own horn, or I don't want to come
Mhm.
across as being, too braggy. How do you help them get to that point, that art of just self promoting?
Yeah, that's a very popular topic that I speak on quite a bit. I
Uh-huh.
remember when I first started my business too, that was like the number one topic. And the biggest thing that I tell people to consider is how to reframe that from the vantage point of, how is what I'm going to share business relevant to
Mm,
somebody else? How can it truly help them? So let me give you an example. So let's say I have just worked on a project, and I did really well on it, and maybe it wasn't just me, it was a whole team, right? But the
mm-hmm.
way we ended up working together, maybe we hit some bumps in the road, but at the end of the day, it was a successful result.
Right.
Now, there may be somebody else in a similar role, or maybe they might be in a different department,
Mm-hmm.
but they're struggling, and they haven't had as much success with a similar type of situation, but they could learn from
Right.
yours. If you're not sharing that with anybody, then how can someone benefit from it?
Mm,
So it may be a perspective that you had around something. It may be how you engage some stakeholders or some other leaders into the mix. It may be how you all defined roles. I mean, there could be a variety of different things that you did.
mm-hmm.
So, if you really start breaking it down and doing a bit of debriefing around, hey, here's what worked, here's what didn't work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even just being able to share lessons learned,
Mm-hmm.
it's so powerful. And it's not about, oh, look at me and how awesome I am and how
Right.
I navigated through all of
Uh-huh.
this, but it's more about, hey, I want to help you learn. I want
Mm-hmm.
to help you learn and benefit from the experience that I had or the things
Mm-hmm.
that we did as a team. So when you can answer that question, like how can I share information about a strength or something I did well and make it business relevant?
Right.
And I actually, I have some videos that I've recorded around this too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember if they're still on my website, but, about tasteful self promotion, but I'm
Uh-huh.
happy to provide some access to those too. But it comes up a lot, but that's one of the most powerful things.
I think that's fantastic. That whole leveraging the transfer of knowledge of, it's just that reciprocity, right? Of let me show you, kind of pass the ladder down. By doing that, you're instantly giving yourself credibility of, and so in a sense, that's the self promotion that you're doing by then sharing that. I think that's a fantastic hack in a way to self promote. Neena, this has been a phenomenal conversation and so insightful. And I know that our audience is going to want to hear more from you. And like you said, even some of these tips and things that you might have available on your website. What's the best way for the audience to stay engaged, follow you, learn more, and be able to, accelerate their success in a sense from what you have to offer?
Well, one is following me on LinkedIn
Mm-hmm.
because I'm constantly sharing information out there. So I actually put out articles and resources, but some that I have written and some that others have written. So that's coming out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they can also sign up for my blog, which
Uh-huh.
comes out biweekly. So that's at newberrysolutions.com. And
Uh-huh.
the other thing I'll mention is my app, which is called New Lens.
Uh-huh.
And the app is all about helping you develop foundational leadership skills. So whether you're a leader with a capital L or a little L,
Uh-huh.
doesn't matter. We all need leadership skills.
Right.
And so what we've done is taken all this work over all these years and looking at that track record of over 75% of our clients getting promoted and
Uh-huh.
providing access to those strategies and tools in a way that's easy to implement. So
Mm.
so you can find New Lens, the webpage on the Newberry Solutions site as well, or just download it, from the App Store.
That's fantastic. So, just in closing, what is, just a few words of advice that you'd want to share with the audience in terms of just maintaining, just being successful in their career?
Well, I want to leave you with like a really simple, easy thing to
Mm-hmm.
do, and this is a pretty important question.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you want to show up? Before you get on any phone calls, go into a meeting, anything, just take even 5 seconds to think about how do you want to show up. And if you can connect that also to what you truly want to be known for,
Mm-hmm.
which I'll give you one other snippet around that.
Mm-hmm.
The way to identify that desired brand that you want is to answer this question. If someone were to describe you to somebody else, what are the top 3 things you would want them to say? Right? So
Mm.
just come up with 3 words or phrases. And then coming back to the how do I want to show up? How do I want to show up in a way that really reinforces that brand? If you just do that one simple thing, even if you don't even take the time to think about your brand, but just keep answering that question before
Right.
you engage, you will be so much more intentional and deliberate, and it will start shifting things for you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Nina. I so appreciate your time. And I look forward to staying connected and learning from you and following you as well on LinkedIn.
No, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.